Let's talk guns. Let's talk guns.
Yeah, let's.
I want to
you
move
want
on.
to get frisky?
All right.
All right. Quantitative tightening. Google it.
Okay.
Fucking Google it.
Listen to the podcast. Google it. We're here to tell you what to Google.
Hit me up in the Discord.
Yeah. Look, Eric, maybe you can not necessarily tee it up, but just begin with any general sentiment.
Wait, can we talk about our dinner last week after the podcast where we recorded?
We're
We're having a great time.
Air some dirty laundry.
And then I'm upset. Eric called me a lot of bad names at dinner.
It's an important preface.
Because people in the Discord asked what R word.
He called me the R word.
Yeah, what's the R word?
A lot of times.
What's the R word?
I don't want to say it. Some people get mad at me if I say it. She might be listening.
Called him really smart.
Yes. Some of the Discord was like, God, what was their guess? Did you see that? Oh,
What the R word was?
Yeah. It was really good.
And in classic David fashion, he immediately starts moderating the discussion. So we're sitting around a table over a steak dinner. Armand and I are having like a little sidebar about a business we're working on, and these guys are absolutely just yelling at the top of their lungs.
I wasn't yelling. Okay, I was being yelled at.
No. Nearby tables.
I'm with Steven on this one. He was being yelled at.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of the yelling. I was yelling.
To Eric's credit, the next day he was like, "Yo, my bad."
One of the things about Steven is he dishes it, right? Steven dishes it. Basically disagrees with everything most of us say.
I'm a good punching bag.
And yet takes it quite well, good sir.
You stay pretty rational,
You
pretty
stay
calm in the
calm.
heat of the argument, I think.
Yeah, you stay calm.
But like David had to moderate a little bit of a...
Okay, so what were we talking about? We were talking about guns. We were talking about the shooting. It was like the day after. Actually, maybe this was...
the Uvalde shooting, right? That was the one?
Yeah, we have to even call it which one now at this point.
That's
that basically tells us what we need to know. But look, let's give it to Eric here, like just some general sentiment here of like how you felt that day, maybe how you feel now, and then we'll kind of open a discussion.
Yeah, so I think this is my third conversation now since that moment where I was yelling at Steven across the table. So I hopefully can maintain race. Sorry, Steven, again. Sorry, everybody. I think like where I'm at, I want to talk about how I feel about it, and then I want to talk about like why I feel about it, how I frame that decision making, and then I'll like pass it over to you guys. But like how I feel about it is like I don't own any guns, but I do believe in the right to own them. And the reason why I believe in the right to own them is maybe different than a lot of other people's. Like some people are into hunting or protecting themselves. Like what I'm into is protecting against this like really rare sort of like 4 standard deviation case where the government starts to impose themselves too hard on its own citizens to a point where it's like, oh my God, they're actually like getting violent against us, and now we have some recourse. Like and I think Armand, we were talking about this a little bit at the table, like maybe in a moment of sanctity for me, but like you mentioned that like this has happened more times than we really give it credit. Like in a lot of different countries, in a lot of different civilizations, like the government, its own government has come down on its own people, and like the fact that we have guns is very important. Now the way that I want to frame, so that's how I feel. The way I want to frame that decision making is that like I'm not blind. I am empathetic to the fact that like we are paying a cost every day to maintain this security against this like 4 standard deviation rare event, blacktail, like black swan, like long tail event. Like there is a cost day to day. Like even just today, we saw another event, like an Oklahoma hospital. There was 5 people murdered in a shooting. I didn't even really get too deep into it, but like every day there are events.
Yeah.
And these are the costs. And I don't want to like throw them as statistics because they're actual human lives. And like I recognize that we are paying actual cost in terms of lives for a perceived potential threat that is very low probability here in the United States, particularly because like you would say like, oh, well, other countries, that's them. But like here in the United States, it wouldn't happen here. But it's like, maybe it wouldn't happen here because we have freaking guns. And that's like where I want to frame it is like, so you have this threat existential that like is not yet construed, but it is a potential threat, and you want to protect against that. And in the immediate term, you're paying an actual cost. So like where I'm at is like, how do we mitigate the actual cost? And I think that comes out in like multiple themes, right? Like mitigating the actual cost comes out in themes. And one theme is like, well, what about like mental health? And then another theme is like, well, what about restricting access? And another theme is like, well, what about, what about like changing the type of weapon? And these are like different parties talk about these three different themes on mitigating the actual cost. And I think that's like a real conversation to have, and I don't know what the right answer is on how to mitigate, but I do think that mitigating the actual cost while still maintaining the security against this real potential threat is probably what we should be talking about.
I have a question. What would you say that I said that triggered you so much? Because I don't even remember what I said.
Playing this perfect.
Because everything you said sounds kind of reasonable. I don't like disagree with any.
Yeah, so I don't want to trigger Stephen or I
level.
and this is actually a better sidebar.
No, I'm not triggered. I'm not triggered.
I will get triggered. But,
as all the triggered say.
So I brought this up at the dinner table, and you guys all disagreed with me. But Stephen has a knack of taking the conversation away from its intended into a technicality. And what happened in our conversation is that in our technicality, I said that AR-15s are more lethal than pistols, and Stephen came at me with a stat that says pistols kill more people than AR-15s, so therefore more lethal. But what I was trying to say is that like,
you know what's fascinating about that is that you're both
AR-15 is higher, and I don't really want to get into that.
Right.
But that's where we got
I feel like
lost.
it's kind of worth getting into.
We don't. Before we get into that,
okay,
first of all, what's fascinating about just that right there is that they're both right, and so let's just zoom out for 1 second.
You don't think one of us is more right than the other?
Maybe. And we can debate that and fight in the messy gray of the middle. And I think that's like what I'm trying to point out. This topic reminds me so much of abortion. One of the most complex topics in existence. I think that fundamentally, like, guns are also a topic that relates to life, right? People are dying. Abortion, fetuses, babies are dying. Like, it's a similar topic. And obviously that brings out an incredible amount of emotion and an incredible amount of identity and partisan politics, okay? So that's what's fascinating about this. Now, look, I just want to kind of like more grandiose big picture set a couple things. And of course, yes, you can follow up, Nick. Look, I'm not an expert on any of this. I have certain like my own ideas and sentiments. And I think that like Stephen and Nick have some very interesting data through the years that they've come across that they'll share. And even things today I know you were looking at, Stephen, for example, that you'll share. But here's something that's very important about this topic, just like the abortion topic. The number of layers that exist here and how you begin to piece these together is incredibly difficult. Let's just look at a couple of these layers. One, you have a country, the United States of America, where most of this is happening, where mass murders are happening, where people are being killed by gunfire, whether it's gang related or not. Sometimes I'm like, Steven's doing the technicality thing, by the way.
Steven and I are making faces at Armand as he's going through
Am
this.
I making a face? I feel like I'm not making a face. It's like completely involuntary.
I can't even get. So you have this country that was founded by people that were persecuted, and you've seen this all around the world, that genocide and ethnic cleansing and religious beliefs get in the way of societies, even societies that are extremely homogenous, for example. Like you get the same effects. And so people often argue and they say like, well, why does a country like Sweden or Finland not need guns, but you guys do? So we have this aspect, just one layer here that we're driving, where you have this country that was founded because of persecution, because of beliefs that they had that were different from the state, from the country that they lived in. And they had to leave. They had to go create a new society. And one of the first beliefs and one of the first principles that they laid into their documents was the right to bear arms. And the reason for that was because that they believed that the moment that the government stopped fearing its people, there was enough power that overtook those people. But then at the same time, hundreds of years have gone by and the gun technology has evolved. Now you have semi-automatic weapons, to Eric's point, where people can walk into a fucking school that are psychotic and kill children. Children are dying because of the technological advances that have happened with weapons. And so then it becomes, well, what are the guns that should be available at all in the first place? And if we are needing to take guns away from the people, are we exchanging freedom? Are we exchanging security for liberty? And who should be in charge of that security? This is why this topic in general is so challenging. And then you have basically an identity game where you have on one side people saying, okay, we're not heartless, like we care about the fact that people are dying, children are dying, even people are dying in game-related like wars and fights. And at the same time, we can't exchange this liberty. And there's a different way to solve that problem. But on this other side, it's like, well, you're a heartless bigot and you care more about owning your guns than you do about people's lives. And that is not a conversation. There's no conversation happening there. And the conversation is where we meet in the middle and we actually look at the nuance of these issues and we say, like, maybe both of these are necessary and there's a way.
Yeah, and you kind of framed it up really well, why this discussion is really hard to have. And there's another reason why I think this discussion is difficult to have, because we have to ask ourselves, like, what question are we asking? What problem are we trying to solve? And I always, when looking at any problem, I try to tell myself, ask better questions, get better answers. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are we trying to solve for? Are we solving for less homicide? Less homicide by guns? Because if you look at all gun deaths, more than half of them come from suicide. More deaths from guns come from suicide than homicide. Okay, then you take that to the next step further. Are we looking for less homicide by guns in mass shootings? That's a much more specific question and a much more specific problem we're solving. And if we're trying to solve for less homicide, then you have to bring up the cold statistic that mass shootings are a very low percentage. I think in the best case, you're looking at 2.5% of all gun deaths.
Low percent compared to shootings in this country.
Right.
But when the rest of the world looks at this, they're like, you crazy motherfuckers. You're all shooting each other up.
It's far lower.
It is far lower. I took the data that showed it at the highest percentage. So mass shootings, the data that was most generous in terms of like what is the biggest problem, showed that they're 2.5% of all gun deaths. And then you could take that question even further and more specific. Are we trying to solve for less homicide by guns and mass shootings using a semi-automatic rifle? And I think it's important to define what semi-automatic is. It means you pull the trigger, the bullet fires, and it automatic reloads. And I don't know if most people know this, but like an Armalite 15 does that, an AR-15 does that, but so does a handgun.
Yes.
So they don't actually fire at a more rapid pace. And
Correct.
So, I'm not trying to like make a specific point just
you're
yet.
saying something very important.
The question.
Nobody is even asking a question before they have the argument.
And that's why we talk past each other.
There's the complete talking past one another. If you turn on the news, if you have a conversation with a friend, the only conversation is, you're a heartless fucker who just wants to protect the Second Amendment, and the other person is like, well, you're an idiot. You're not even asking the right question. But the reality is, like, that's not quite the argument. But the reality is that is the question. What are we solving for? What are we solving for, actually? Are we solving for less murder overall? And how do you even take that? Because it's pieces of different types of murder that are occurring. I'm asking you guys, what are we solving for?
I mean, if you look at mainstream, I think it depends on where you're looking. Like if you look at mainstream media, if you look at, what talking political heads say, we're trying to solve for this thing that just like hurts us in our hearts. Seeing mass shootings of like, at schools, it hits us different. And when you can look at the data, like we just talked about it, like more homicides come from handguns than Armalite 15s. There are more suicides that come from guns than homicides. And so you look at that data.
Do we want to prevent the most tragic murders first, maybe? Is that what you're saying?
It does have this like this thing that hits you harder, and it makes you pull this part of your brain in which you don't care about the data. But I think that as a person in power, you have to take a step back. And I would like to think that you would have a rational political actor and would say, okay, we understand this is a problem, this is a travesty, but like what problem? I wish they would set the conversation for.
So I agree with that like you don't want to solve the problem of like generally just like guns are bad, you know, in general, because that's very extreme, before you solve the problem of like someone being able to walk into a school and kill 19 children. Like that's the first problem.
I mean, God, I hate even saying this, but
can we talk about that though? Because
yes,
there's no way to solve the problem of somebody walking into a school and killing 19 children unless you are going to like arm a bunch of people in the school and have all the security measure, which you could do, right? But we shouldn't like delude ourselves into thinking that the only reason all these kids are dead is because like guns exist, right? I think it's like a more nuanced thing. Like if somebody really wanted to go on a spree and kill people, right? And to kill kids, and all guns were gone.
Look, they could do it with a car like they did in France.
They could make a
last
bomb,
year.
right?
Yes.
Like, there's like a lot of terrible things that could be done.
Yes.
And this isn't to say that we shouldn't do anything. I'm just saying that like, I'm trying to meet people halfway on this issue. Like my biggest problem with this whole thing, you related this to the abortion issue, and I think there's like a lot of strong parallels to it, right? Like one of my main problems with the abortion issue in particular, and I actually see this as like a thing in a lot of issues, and I am going to lay blame on one specific side here. I feel like the left in this country does not do a good enough job of actually understanding the beliefs and pain points and perspectives of people on the right. There's a tendency to just be like, these people are dumb, racist, gun-loving, child-hating idiots, and fuck them, and we're just gonna do whatever we can because like, you know, and I don't own any guns, but I come from like a gun-owning household in like a rural area, and I'm like very in tune to why people have guns, right? And like, the people on the left, when they talk about guns, it's like, I understand why people on the right are basically like, screw you guys. Like, and that's interpreted as like, you don't care about kids. But the reality is like, we don't actually trust you and your intentions, because like what you're saying is like patently ridiculous, right? Ergo, you must have like ulterior motives. And they're like, the trust in the government is already at all-time lows anyway. So you pair those two things together, and it's obvious to understand like why people reflexively react to this, right? Like this push to ban quote unquote assault weapons, whatever the fuck that means, right? Like it's like the essence of this term that was just made up to conjure emotion in people. That doesn't really. It basically just means scary looking gun, right? It's like a rifle that has like cosmetic things that make it sort of look like a machine. It's a silly descriptor, right? It's obviously made to like conjure up an emotional response, right? And if you look at these stats, right, sort of dispassionately, oh, your goal is to prevent deaths? Well, okay, like I think in the recent FBI stats, like 400 people were killed with rifles, and like 20 times that number were killed with handguns. 20 times.
So I saw that number, and my next question was like, well, how many handguns are out there, and how many, you know, rifles are out there?
That's a great follow-up. And what did you find?
I found that they're actually equal.
They're the
roughly
same.
Equal. Yeah,
the same amount of pistols. So the deaths per capita of gun and the deaths total are way higher on pistols.
But hold on. Like first there's cost, and then there's the fact that like walking into some place, especially if you're in a gang, like having a handgun like on your back or like under your jacket or in your pants is a lot easier than carrying around a rifle. You're carrying a rifle.
You're just arguing for my point.
Yeah, but I just want to distinguish that. Like I think it's very important.
I mean, this gets into the argument me and Eric got over at dinner. He was basically like equating lethality to like this thing is designed to kill people better, and I was like, lethality also has a component of like covertness to it, yes. Right? Like you can't walk around with a freaking rifle and not have people notice that you have a rifle. You can walk into a school with freaking 6 pistols strapped into you and nobody would know, right? Yes. There's an element of that makes that thing more lethal. There's a reason why we have this like distinction in the law of like concealed carry. Like there's an acknowledgement that the fact that you could have some hidden weapon be dangerous.
You're really driving at this idea that like if you're trying to solve the problem of murders, then banning this thing that we've titled these assault rifles, these assault weapons, is actually not getting to the root of the problem.
No, it's not. And like people on the right aren't stupid. They're like, okay, what's your motive? And like I remember the last election, like Beto O'Rourke, right? He finally slipped and came out and said, he's like, hell yeah, we're coming for your ARs and your and that's what everybody on the right believes. They believe they just want to take everybody's guns. And that is what people on the left believe, because if you really want to solve people dying, you're not going to confiscate this like symbolic gun that kills 300, 400. Like literally more people are killed per year by blunt objects and by like hands and fists than rifles, right?
Right.
Like it's so you're obviously not optimizing for saving lives. You're either optimizing for emotion, which I think is worth optimizing for to a degree, right? I don't totally discount that. It is horrible on the nation's psyche when you see kids killed, and they shouldn't just be like raw numbers, right? So I don't say that that's not a good thing to do, right? But like I think people on the left should just be honest. They should just be like, yes, we want to ban all guns. Let's have that debate. Instead, what they're trying to do is have this discussion where they're like, oh no, we don't want to ban all guns. We just want to ban these weapons of war that are obviously killing everybody. And then anybody with a brain just looks at the numbers and looks at what's going on. They're like, fuck you. No, you don't. Like, I don't trust you. I don't trust anything you're doing. So I am going to react against everything you do. And it's no wonder that like nothing gets done, because the left especially is being incredibly dishonest about their intentions. I think the right is probably a little naive and a little too into guns. Like I do think guns generally, in a general sense, are good.
For the right, the guns are very symbolic.